I always knew that one day, I'd leave the city behind. The constant noise, the crowds, the endless rush of life. It was all wearing me down. As a civil engineer, I spent my days designing complex infrastructure, managing projects, and overseeing the construction of everything from highways to bridges. But when it came to my own life, I longed for simplicity and serenity. So, my family and I took a leap of faith and bought a property out in the country. The house wasn't huge, nothing too extravagant, but it was perfect for what we needed. It had a large yard for the kids to run around in, and it was just far enough from the city to make you feel like you were living in a different world. There was a stream running through the property, beautiful to look at, but a pain when it came to getting from one side of the land to the other. It wasn't wide, but it was deep enough that you couldn't just hop over it, and the banks were steep enough that crossing without a bridge was impossible. At first, I didn't think much of it. The road took me to the front of the house, so it wasn't like it was a huge inconvenience. But after a while, I started to notice something that bugged me. A shorter route ran across the stream, but it was essentially unusable. If I wanted to get to the other side, I'd have to either drive a long way around or take a hike through thick underbrush, both of which were far from ideal. That's when the idea struck me, what if I built a bridge? Now, I've always been the kind of person who looks for solutions. Maybe it's the engineer in me, but I saw this as an opportunity. I had the skills, the knowledge, and the tools to do something about it. A bridge. A simple, sturdy wooden bridge that could easily support the weight of a vehicle. It wasn't going to be anything fancy, but it would serve its purpose. The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Not only would it save me time, but it would also add a unique feature to the property. I could just picture it. A wooden bridge, spanning the stream, nestled in the natural beauty of the land. So I made the decision. I would build a bridge. The challenge, however, wasn't just about building something functional, it was about getting the design right. How would I anchor it? How high should the clearance be? What type of wood would hold up best against the elements? I spent weeks researching, drafting plans, and considering my options. I wanted to build something that was simple and economical, but I also wanted it to last. The last thing I needed was a bridge that would buckle after a few years. I started by figuring out the dimensions. The span was about 20 feet across, and the stream was about 4 feet deep at its highest point. I calculated the weight the bridge would need to support, including the weight of a vehicle, and then began sourcing materials. Pressure-treated lumber would be a good choice for the decking, while I would use more durable wood for the main supports. I wanted something that could hold up to the harsh weather, snow, rain, and everything in between. Next, I had to figure out how to build the thing. I didn't have a crew. It was just me, some tools, and a lot of patience. But that was part of the fun. It was a chance to get my hands dirty, to really get involved in something that would have a lasting impact on the property. I've always believed that doing things yourself is part of the satisfaction of homeownership. The first thing I did was clear the area around the stream. I had to make sure I had enough space to work with, and that meant trimming back the vegetation on both sides. It wasn't an easy task, but I wanted to make sure the bridge would sit on solid ground. Once that was done, I started on the supports. I had to dig holes for the main supports, for large posts that would anchor the bridge to the banks of the stream. I dug deep, ensuring that the posts would be solidly anchored in the ground, providing a sturdy foundation for the structure. I used concrete to set the posts in place, allowing them to cure for several days before moving forward. It was a slow process, but each step felt like a small victory. The next challenge was building the deck itself. I laid the planks one by one, securing them with heavy-duty screws. I made sure everything was level and that the spacing between the planks was just right. It took a lot of time, but as I worked, I found myself getting lost in the rhythm of it. The quiet of the forest, the sound of the stream, the satisfaction of building something with my own hands. It was incredibly therapeutic. I also had to figure out how to get the ramp just right. The incline had to be gentle enough for a car to drive up without bottoming out, but not so steep that it would cause problems during wet weather. After a few trial runs, I finally got the angle right and added some gravel to the ramp to improve traction. There were moments during the build when things didn't go according to plan. One of the support beams slipped, and I had to redo a section of the decking when I noticed it wasn't level. But that's the nature of building something from scratch. It's never perfect the first time. But each mistake was a lesson, and I adapted. By the time I finished, I had a bridge that spanned the stream with ease. It wasn't the most intricate design, but it didn't need to be. It was sturdy, practical, and it did exactly what I had set out to do. It wasn't just a bridge. It was a testament to the time and effort I'd invested in making this place feel more like home. The first time I drove across the bridge, I felt a deep sense of pride. It was everything I had hoped for. The bridge was solid, smooth, and functional. I could now cross the stream with ease, getting to the other side of the property in a fraction of the time it used to take. It made my life a lot easier, and it felt good to know that I had built it myself. When my wife saw it, she was impressed too. The kids loved it. They thought the bridge was like something out of a storybook. And for me, it was more than just a shortcut. It was a symbol of what I could achieve with a little elbow grease, some planning, and a bit of time. It was my bridge, my creation, and it was a part of the land now, just like the trees and the stream. For about a month, life had been perfect. The bridge I built wasn't just a convenience. It had become part of our daily routine. No longer did we have to rely on the long winding road to get in and out of the property. The bridge cut our trips into town by half, and the satisfaction of driving over something I had designed and built with my own hands never wore off. My kids even called it Dad's Bridge, and every time I crossed it, I felt a small surge of pride. But that sense of accomplishment would soon turn to something far darker. One chilly morning, long before sunrise, I found myself awake and preparing for an early trip into town. The air was damp, and a heavy fog blanketed the property, muffling every sound. It was the kind of morning where everything felt still, like the world was holding its breath. I started my truck, savoring the warmth of the heater as I rolled down the gravel driveway. The headlights barely cut through the mist, but I knew the path well by now. As I approached the bridge, something felt off. At first, I couldn't put my finger on it, but then my headlights illuminated the ground where the bridge should have been. There was nothing there. Panic surged through me, and I slammed the brakes, the truck skidding to a halt just a few feet from the edge of the stream. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared out into the fog, unable to believe what I was seeing. Or, more accurately, what I wasn't seeing. The bridge was gone. I jumped out of the truck, the chill of the morning air biting through my jacket, and ran to the edge of the stream. At first, I thought I was imagining things. Maybe the fog was playing tricks on me. But as I got closer, the destruction was unmistakable. My bridge, the bridge I had painstakingly designed and built, was nothing more than a pile of shattered wood scattered downstream. The beams were broken, splintered in places where they'd been deliberately struck. The planks that once formed the deck lay in pieces, some half submerged in the stream, others wedged against rocks further downstream. The supports, which I had carefully anchored to the ground, were ripped out entirely, leaving gaping holes where they had stood. For a moment, I just stood there, stunned. My mind raced with possibilities. Had there been a storm during the night? No, the weather had been calm. Could it have been an accident? But the damage was too deliberate, too thorough. The longer I stared, the more convinced I became that this wasn't the work of nature or chance. Someone had done this. Someone had destroyed my bridge on purpose. After a few minutes of fruitless searching for clues, I headed back to the house. My thoughts swirled as I walked, alternating between disbelief and anger. Who would do this? And why? When I got inside, my wife was in the kitchen, already awake. She looked up from her coffee, her face creasing with concern when she saw me. "What's wrong?" she asked. "The bridge," I said, my voice tight with frustration. "It's gone. Someone destroyed it." Her eyes widened. "What? Are you sure it wasn't, I don't know, a storm or something?" I shook my head. "No, it wasn't a storm. The wood is splintered, the supports ripped out. Someone did this deliberately." She frowned, setting her mug down. "That's insane. Who would do something like that?" "I don't know," I said, running a hand through my hair. "But whoever it was, they didn't leave any signs. No tracks, no tools, nothing. It's like they were never even there." My wife hesitated, then reached for a drawer. Actually, this came yesterday, she said, pulling out an envelope and handing it to me. It was from the HOA. I tore it open, my heart sinking as I scanned the letter inside. It was a notice of violation, citing my bridge as an unapproved structure that didn't comply with HOA regulations. The letter didn't explicitly say they had destroyed the bridge, but the timing was too coincidental. The bridge had stood for weeks without issue. Then, less than 24 hours after I received a violation notice, it was gone. They did it, I muttered, my grip tightening on the letter. What? My wife asked, her brow furrowing. The HOA. They're behind this, I said, my voice rising. They didn't even give me a chance to respond. They just tore it down. My wife looked skeptical. Are you sure? The letter doesn't say anything about them destroying it. I held up the letter, shaking it slightly. Come on. You really think it's a coincidence? I build the bridge, they send a violation notice, and then the next day it's gone? Who else would do something like this? She didn't respond, but the doubt in her eyes stung. I couldn't blame her for being cautious. It wasn't like the HOA had admitted to anything, but I knew how they operated. They had a reputation for being heavy-handed, especially when it came to enforcing their rules. And if they thought my bridge didn't fit into their idea of what the neighborhood should look like, I had no doubt they'd take matters into their own hands. By the time I finished my coffee, my anger had simmered into a cold, determined resolve. If the HOA thought they could bully me into submission, they had another thing coming. I pulled out their contact information and dialed the number on the letter. The phone rang a few times before a man with a clipped, professional tone answered. Homeowners Association. How can I help you? I let him know who I was and got straight to the point. I'm calling about my bridge. There was a pause on the other end. Your bridge? Yes, I said, my patience already wearing thin. The one that's now a pile of debris in my stream. I got a notice from you yesterday about a violation, and now the bridge is gone. I want to know if the HOA had anything to do with it. The man hesitated, and I could almost hear him weighing his response. I'm not sure what you're referring to, but if you'd like to file a complaint, I can. I don't want to file a complaint, I snapped. I want answers. Did the HOA authorize the removal of my bridge? Sir, I don't have that information, he said, his tone growing frostier. But I can look into it and get back to you. Fine, I said, gritting my teeth. But you'd better believe I'm not letting this go. I hung up, frustration bubbling in my chest. I didn't trust the HOA to give me a straight answer, but it was a start. If they were responsible, I'd make sure they were held accountable. And if they weren't, then I had an even bigger mystery on my hands. The morning after the phone call, I decided I couldn't leave things unresolved. The vague non-answers I'd been given only added fuel to my frustration. If the HOA thought they could brush me off with bureaucratic stonewalling, they were sorely mistaken. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to stop until I got them. Later that day, I drove to the HOA office, my chest tightening with a mix of anger and determination. The office itself was a stark contrast to my own home, a polished, modern building with meticulously landscaped grounds that screamed control and authority. I parked my truck, stepped out, and took a deep breath before walking in. The receptionist greeted me with a practiced smile. Good afternoon. How can I help you? I need to speak to someone about a violation notice and the destruction of my bridge, I said, keeping my tone as measured as I could. She hesitated, her smile faltering slightly. Do you have an appointment? No, but this can't wait. She nodded, typing something into her computer before directing me to a small waiting area. After a few minutes, a man in a crisp suit approached me. He extended a hand, which I reluctantly shook. Good afternoon, he said, his voice laced with practiced politeness. I understand you have some concerns? I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I want to know who authorized the destruction of my bridge, I said, my voice firm. I built that bridge on my property, and now it's gone. He raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting such a direct confrontation. You must be referring to the structure over the stream. Yes, I replied, crossing my arms. What gives you the right to tear it down? He sighed, adopting the kind of tone people use when they think they're speaking to someone unreasonable. The stream in question is considered public property. The HOA has a responsibility to ensure the safety and accessibility of all residents. Your bridge posed a potential hazard and was removed accordingly. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. Public property? I repeated, incredulous. That stream is on my land, and I've checked the deeds. It's private property. His expression didn't waver. Even so, the HOA determined that the structure did not meet safety standards. It was an unapproved alteration, and we acted within our rights. Your rights? I snapped, my voice rising. You had no right to touch my property, let alone destroy something I built. Do you have any idea how much work went into that bridge? I understand you're upset, he said, his tone maddeningly calm. But the HOA has a duty to uphold the community's standards. I shook my head, disbelief giving way to fury. This isn't about standards. This is about you overstepping your bounds. You had no jurisdiction to touch that bridge. He didn't respond, instead gesturing toward the door. If you'd like to file a formal complaint, you're welcome to do so. Otherwise, there's nothing more I can offer. I stared at him for a moment, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. It was clear I wasn't going to get anywhere with him. You'll be hearing from my lawyer, I said coldly, turning on my heel and walking out. By the time I got home, my anger had settled into a cold, determined resolve. I wasted no time reaching out to a lawyer who specialized in property rights. When I explained the situation to her during our first meeting, she nodded as she reviewed the details. You're absolutely right, she said. If the stream and the surrounding land are part of your property, the HOA had no authority to interfere. She asked me to bring any documentation I had, so I dug up the deeds to the property and a map showing the boundaries of my land. She examined them carefully, tracing the lines with her finger. This is clear-cut, she said. The stream is entirely within your property. The HOA's claim that its public land doesn't hold water. Excuse the pun. Not only did they violate your ownership rights, but by destroying the bridge, they've also caused property damage. You have a strong case. Hearing her say that was a relief, but it didn't erase the anger simmering in my chest. What are my options? I asked. We can file a lawsuit, she said. You have grounds to sue for three main things: property damage caused by the destruction of the bridge, violation of your ownership rights, and moral damages for the stress and inconvenience this has caused you. We can also include legal expenses in the claim. I nodded. Let's do it. Over the next few weeks, we worked together to build the case. The day we filed the lawsuit felt like the first real step toward justice. For weeks, I had wrestled with a gnawing sense of helplessness, watching as the HOA dismissed my concerns and bulldozed over my rights. Now, the wheels were turning in my favor, and I was ready to see this through to the end. When the case finally reached court, the HOA came prepared, armed with their legal team and a polished narrative. Their representatives stood confidently at the stand, laying out their argument as though they were doing the community a public service. We acted in the interest of public safety, the representative said, their voice steady and authoritative. The structure in question posed a significant risk to the residents of the neighborhood. As the governing body of this community, it is our responsibility to ensure all shared resources are safe and accessible. They claimed that the stream, despite being located on my property, was public due to its natural flow, and that the bridge I built was a hazard to anyone who might use it. They insisted that their actions were justified and aligned with their duty to the community. It was hard to sit there and listen to their carefully crafted defense, knowing it was riddled with lies and half-truths. But I had faith in my lawyer. She was sharp, confident, and ready to dismantle their argument piece by piece. When it was our turn, my lawyer wasted no time getting to the heart of the matter. She began by presenting the deed to my property, which clearly outlined the boundaries of my land and the inclusion of the stream. The HOA's claim that this stream is public is entirely unfounded, she said, addressing the judge directly. The property in question is private, and the HOA had no jurisdiction to interfere with it, She went on to highlight the lack of evidence supporting their so-called safety concerns. The bridge in question was structurally sound and built according to engineering standards. Furthermore, it was not intended for public use. The HOA's argument that this structure posed a danger is speculative at best. To drive the point home, she reminded the court that the HOA had taken these actions without warning, communication, or consent. The destruction of this bridge was not an act of public service. It was an unauthorized intrusion onto private property. Their actions were not only unjustified but malicious, as evidenced by their complete disregard for the rights of the property owner. I watched as the HOA representative shifted uncomfortably in their seat. My lawyer's arguments were methodical and irrefutable, and it was clear that their defense was starting to crumble. After what felt like an eternity, the judge delivered their ruling. The courtroom was silent as they summarized the case, acknowledging the validity of my claims and the overreach of the HOA's actions. The evidence presented by the plaintiff is compelling and clearly demonstrates that the stream and surrounding land are private property. The HOA had no legal right to destroy the bridge without prior notice or consent. Their actions were not only unlawful, but also a significant violation of the property owner's rights. The judge's verdict was decisive. The HOA was ordered to pay the following: $20,000 for property damage, representing the cost of rebuilding the bridge; $10,000 for moral damages, acknowledging the emotional distress caused by their actions; $15,000 for legal expenses incurred during the lawsuit; $20,000 in punitive damages, serving as a penalty for the HOA's unethical behavior and a warning to prevent similar actions in the future. The total compensation amounted to $65,000. It was a resounding victory. As the judge finalized their decision, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Finally, someone had held the HOA accountable for their actions. The ruling didn't just stop at financial compensation. The court also ordered a comprehensive review of the HOA's policies and practices, particularly concerning property rights and legal authority. As part of the fallout, the HOA leadership faced immediate consequences. Key members were temporarily suspended from their positions, pending further investigations into their conduct. Rumors began circulating that this wasn't the first time the HOA had overstepped its bounds, and the court's ruling opened the door for other residents to come forward with their grievances. There was even talk of the HOA being restructured or disbanded altogether, depending on the outcome of the investigations. For the first time, it felt like the tide was turning against the unchecked power they had wielded for so long. Looking back on the ordeal, I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. On one hand, I was vindicated. The court's decision was a clear acknowledgement that I had been wronged and that the HOA had acted outside the bounds of their authority. But the victory was bittersweet. The bridge, which I had poured so much time and effort into, was still gone. The process of rebuilding it would take time and resources, and the damage done to my sense of security and trust in the community would take even longer to heal. But in the end, it was worth it. As I stood by the stream one evening, watching the water flow peacefully under the twilight sky, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The bridge would be rebuilt, stronger and better than before. And this time, I'd make sure no one could take it away from me again.